We now have the main controls we need, and as you can see, I also added the ones to the right side too. This was just the same as how we added them to the left. Just make sure you maintain the same orientations as the joints. I also decided to update the foot icon too, just so it more closely matches the creature's foot. Okay, so we have the controls now, so we are a step closer to being able to build the systems which will drive the joints. Before we do that, we're going to make sure the scene is organised correctly. Open the outliner and press Ctrl and G to create an empty group. This will be the main group for our creature, so call it creature_rig_group. You can call it anything you like really, but make sure it ties into this character. The animator may end up with multiple characters in the scene, so it's good to keep things named correctly. Here we have the controls. Let's just rename the group they are already in, so it doesn't have a capital letter. Again, this is just a personal preference. And move that under the creature rig group. Now let's organise the controls. Let's take all these groups and parent them to the root control. Now if we move the root control, everything follows. Apart from the skeleton, that is, but eventually the controls will move the joints. Next, create another group and call this Do Not Touch. We need to put it in capitals so it's obvious that the animator shouldn't go anywhere near this. If they do, they will end up breaking the rig. Move this into the creature rig group too. Create 4 more groups. Call the first Rig Systems, the second Skeleton, the third Geometry, and the fourth Visual Aids. Move these to the Do Not Touch group, so they are now part of the hierarchy. Now move the root joint so it sits under the skeleton group. And all the models to the geometry group. We can delete this now. So there we have the main hierarchy. We currently don't have anything to put into visual aids or rig systems, but we now have the groups for when we do have something later in the workshop. If you wanted, you could also add a blend shapes group, so you can keep those in the same scene. So now we have a single group with everything tucked away inside. Okay, so with the scene organised, let's look into adding some attributes. These will help us control different elements of the rig and also offer some extra functionality to the animator too. Select the root control and go to Modify, Add Attribute. With this window, we can create our own custom attributes, which we can then use to drive other attributes in the rig. So it means everything is in one place and easier to access. The first we're going to create is an enum. What this will do is give us a drop-down box with numerous options to choose from. But we are going to use it for something different initially. We will be looking at some of the other options as we work our way around the rig. Give it a long name of Control Divider, and then check the Override Nice Name checkbox. Now add some dashes, maybe 10. What we're going to do is create a divider so we can separate attributes in the channel box, which makes them easier to navigate. Change the first enum name to Controls in capitals and delete the second name Blue. If I add this now, you can see that we have a new attribute, and it's more obvious because of the way we created it. Now we just need to right-click on it and lock it, and also make it non-keyable. We do this so the animator doesn't inadvertently put keyframes on it. There, it has a grey tag now to indicate it's locked. Now let's create another enum. This time call it face. We don't need a nice name this time. Now change the options. Change green to hide and blue to show. We are setting the first option to hide because in the attribute this equals 0. So if we connected it to our visibility attributes, they would be set to 0 when this is set to hide. They would then be set to 1 and visible again when the attribute is set to show. Okay, let's add that. So now we have a drop-down box. And this is what an enum attribute is supposed to look like. When connected, we can use this to quickly show and hide the face controls. Let's repeat that now and create enum attributes for the body and the arms and also the legs. The good thing about these attributes is we can also select them all and scrub with the middle mouse button to quickly change them. Okay, time for another divider. Give this enum a long name of Viz Divider. And again, change the nice name to a series of dashes. We built it this way because if we just added dashes in the long name, the names would clash with other attributes. So using the nice name instead means we can have the same number of dashes, which makes it look more uniform. Change the green enum to visibility, again in capitals to make it more obvious, and delete blue. Let's add that. Now we just need to right click on it and lock it, and make it non-keyable. We're going to create 2 more enums again, just like with the face, body and arms above. So these will just have the same hide and show options. Call the first one geometry and the second blend shapes. Now I know we won't be using blend shapes on this rig, but it's an option if you need it on your rigs. We need another divider now. I'm sure you're getting the hang of these now, so I'm not going to explain each and every divider I create. This one is going to simply be called lock. I'll show this over here so you can see where I'm going. Before, these were slightly off the screen. So, lock selected and make selected non-keyable. We need another enum, but this time with some different options. Call this export geometry. And we need 3 options this time: unlocked, wireframe, and locked. We will be using this attribute to affect the main models, so we can effectively lock them so they can't be selected. And now a final divider. This will be our debug section. Under here we need 2 visibility attributes, one for the rig systems, and another for the skeleton. Okay, so those are the main global attributes, ones which will affect the whole rig. Now we need to create some which will affect each limb. Select the main arm and leg control, the ones that look like blue arrows. We're going to start with the divider to separate the new attributes from the main ones. Actually, let's add this to a few more controls while we're here. Let's also select the FK controls, and also the main IK controls for the arms and legs. You can add attributes to multiple nodes at once. Okay, so we just want to call this IK_FK, and let's add that. So you see, that's now on all these controls. You will see why we need them on all these later in the video. Now select just the main arrow icons. and this time we need to create a float attribute. This simply allows you to input a number, much like the main attributes. Call this IK/FK switch and give it a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1. This will lock the attribute so we can't go above or below these values. The difference with a float attribute is it will allow you to move in decimal numbers, whereas the integer up here will give you a similar attribute but restrict you to just full numbers. There we go, we now have a slider which we can use to blend between our IK and FK limbs. Now select the main IK controls for the arms and legs. OK, close this for now. So let's look at why I added those attributes to the FK controls too. At the moment, the animator needs to select these each time they want to blend between IK and FK. Now I realise this is not a big thing, but over time this could get repetitive and frustrating if the control isn't immediately visible. Instead, it would be useful if the IK/FK switch attribute could be accessed from anywhere on the arm. Well, we can do this using a proxy attribute. The problem is, you can't currently do that from the attribute editor, as far as I'm aware anyway. The good news is that it's very easy to add them, but it will involve some scripting again. Don't worry, all we need is this line here. We select the controls we want to add the proxy attribute to first. So the FK controls and the main IK control. So it's going to add the attribute here, and this is why we added that divider earlier. We need to find the main attribute we want to control. So select the main arm control and scrub it so we can see what is output in the script editor. This is what we need, the full name and attribute. So we can copy this and paste it next to the -proxy flag. Here, next to the LN flag, which is the long name of the attribute, give the proxy attribute a name. So we can just use the same here. Let's select those controls again. Highlight this and press Enter to run it. And you can see the attribute has been added here. So let's say I'm animating in FK and I want to switch. I can use the attribute already on this control. So if I set that to 0, you see the main attribute is now 0 too. If we move the shoulder now and want to switch again, we can do it here without selecting anything else. There, it's updated for us. So this is a very useful tool to use in your rigs. And unlike direct connections, it keeps the main attribute free to use too, whereas with connections, the main attribute becomes locked. Let's add this to the other arm now. So select the controls and update the name here so we use the right side. And add that. Now the legs. We need to update the main name this time, so we use the right leg control. Select the controls. And add those. And now the left leg. Update the name. Select the controls. And add those. OK, so the next attributes we're going to add will help us to control the stretchiness of the limbs. This will be activated when the IK controls are moved away from the limbs, so it makes sense to add these attributes into these controls. Let's select them first, so both arm and leg IK controls, and add another divider. Call this one Stretch Divider. And create the separator line with some dashes. Set the first enum value to stretch in capitals and delete the blue value. Let's lock that and make it non-keyable. OK, now we need a float attribute and use a minimum of 0 and maximum of 1. Call this stretchiness. This will blend our limbs so they will move between being stretchy and rigid rather than simply being disabled. And now we need another enum, but this will control the type of stretch the animator wants. Call this stretch type, and we need a few different options here. Both, which will squash and stretch. Stretch, which will only allow you to stretch the arm. And finally squash, which will just allow you to squash the arm and not stretch. There we go. So that's the IK set up. What's next? OK, let's add some space swapping options to these. Let's also add some to the head and eye controls too. We will go into this more in a future video, but alternatively, you could check out the video on screen now if you want to know more. Basically, space swapping allows part of the rig to follow another. So, for example, with the eye controls we have here, you can set these so they move with the head or remain in world space, so they don't follow anything. This is useful for keeping the eyes locked onto something, even though the rest of the body or the head is moving. So, as usual, we need a divider to separate this from the main attributes. Call this Space Divider. And call the first option Space. And let's lock them and make them non-keyable. Now that's added to all the selected controls, we can deselect the head and eyes for now. Next we need another enum. Call this Follow and use the following options: World, Cog, Hips and Clavicle. So the control will essentially be told to follow one of these other controls, so it acts like it's parented to them. OK, done. So you will see that the arm control has the option to also follow the clavicle control. We also added this to the foot control too, but we need to change this. We don't want the foot to follow the clavicle control, obviously. Well, you might want to on your rig. All we need to do is go to Modify, Edit Attribute so we can update it. Let's change the last option to Root instead, so it will follow the legs root control. Now let's add some options for the head. This time we're going to use a float attribute so we can blend between the different states. Set the minimum and maximum values to 0 and 1 and call the first Follow Neck and the second Orient Neck. These will control how the head moves, so the animator can essentially keep the head level as the body moves. OK, onto the eyes now. And we are back to using an enum. Set this to World and then Head. So we want the eyes to either remain in world space or follow as the head moves. OK, what next? We don't really need to add everything now. We can always add more attributes as we build the rig. Ah yes, let's add some space swapping options to the FK limbs. So let's select the first control on each limb and add a space divider. Now with the arms, let's give the animator the option to stay in world space or follow the clavicle, like with the IK control. And the legs, they can also stay in world space or follow the hips. Okay, so that's the main attributes added, and like I said earlier, we can add more later if we need them, or we can easily remove them if we find that we don't. So now let's make the attributes control the hierarchy so we can control what's visible and what's not. And we can do this with the attributes we added to the main root control. Open the connection editor and load the root control into the left side. So down here we can see all of our custom attributes. First, let's set up the face attribute. All we need to do is connect these to the groups here, which will show or hide those controls. This creature doesn't really have a face rig, but we can use this to show or hide the eye controls instead. Select the eyes group and load it into the right side. Okay, let's disable non-keyable so we are just left with the main attributes. That's better. And all we need to do is connect it to the visibility attribute. So there, the controls have vanished. But we can control this now with this attribute. Okay, let's do the same with the body attribute. And connect that to the torso group's visibility attribute. Now the arms. So connect that to the arm groups. And finally the legs. There we go. Okay, so next we simply make the geometry attribute control the geometry group's visibility. And the blend shapes attribute, can you guess, controls the blend shapes group. You can probably guess what the rig systems and skeleton attributes control now too. There we go. Now this is very easy to set up, but the animator can now quickly show and hide parts of the rig so they can focus more as they animate. These aren't just for the animators though, as they will help us as we continue to build the rig. Let's bring everything back. We have one more attribute to wire up, and that's this one, Export Geometry. Let's hide the skeleton for now. So as the animator is, well, animating, we just want them to select the controls and nothing else. It can be frustrating if you're accidentally selecting the model each time you're trying to change to another control. So what we can do is use this attribute to lock off the geometry. Load the model into the right side of the connection editor. And now we need to see the non-keyable attributes. Open the attribute editor and look under the display tab. And then drawing overrides. We have lots of options here to control how the model is viewed. If you remember, we used these previously to control the colour of the controls. We just need this attribute here, display type. You see it has options for normal, template and reference. All we need to do is connect our export geometry attribute to this override display type attribute. We can no longer change this here because the export geometry attribute is now in control. So now, with it set to unlocked, it's using the normal option, so the model is selectable. If we change this to locked, it's now using the reference display type, meaning we can no longer select it. Swapping to wireframe now sets the display type to template, so we essentially get the wireframe. It's also important that you enable drawing overrides here, or this won't work. Okay, let's connect the head now. So load it into the right side and choose Override Display Type, and the horns. Let's switch this to wireframe so we can see what's left. Ah yes, the eyes. Let's connect those now. So you would need to go through and do this to all the models to ensure they are locked off correctly. If you fancy experimenting with a bit of scripting, you could always update the for loop, which we used earlier in the course when we updated our rotation orders, and change that so it will update all the models for you. Okay, so now we have the scene organised, so in the next video let's start building some of the base rig systems. And we're going to begin with the control joints.